Good evening, every pony. Welcome to tonight's stream. Gaming is magic, and as always, this is Drata Arcana. And tonight we have an interesting stream for you. Tonight's stream is on high versus low power. So one of the things that, as always, Gaming is Magic likes to do is talk a lot about deck building and giving out a lot of deck advice. And once again, I am doing these streams practically by myself, so please bear with me with my solo talking and making sure that we have enough content going up. Once again, I'm trying to manage all these by myself, and I usually have a lot going on during the week with work and everything. But anyways, on to high versus low power. So, when I deck build, a lot of times it's really difficult to know when to use high power versus low power friends. And we're not going to get into things like events and resources and troublemakers because those tend to have 3 or more power. And that's not really what we're looking at because those cards usually have efficiency as far as AT versus power. And when you're looking at, as far as power goes, trying to decide between cards, most of the time it's going to occur when you have friends. So if you're one of those people that is a Trixie, highest, most powerful unicorn ever, and you're using your Alicorn amulet to have as much power in the world, you are the most powerful unicorn ever. And next thing you know, you're corrupted by all this power in your deck, and you're like, yes, I can totally win. All my flips are 6s, all my flips are 7s, all my friends are 4 and above and everything. And you get into your game, you're super excited to finally play this super powerful deck, and next thing you know, you're just boasting. You're pretty much, you've done all this power and you don't have enough to really get anything done. You're getting nowhere. You're having to bank 6 turns, 7 turns just to get a card out. And you're wondering, what the hell? What did I do wrong? Where was my mistake? And then you're realizing that all these Twilights are defeating you left and right by banishing your Ursa minors. And you're like, what? But my deck had so much power, and I will get my revenge. Well, and you can be totally, you're like, oh man, so you go back to the drawing board, and all of a sudden, you're a Twilight Sparkle, and you're freaking out left and right, and you're like, ah! You're screaming your head off, and you're like, what am I doing wrong? What am I doing? Well, don't worry. Relax. Sit down, grab yourself a nice book, and listen. Actually, that looks like a really comfy Twilight. You know, just relax. Take a breather. Take a step back. Sometimes we get so worked up in the power, and we want our friends to have a lot of power because that's how we confront, that's how we make sure that we're confronting our problems and so forth. But sometimes you need to step back and think, okay, what is the most strategic option available? And that's what we're talking about tonight. And when you take a step back and you think, okay, how am I going to get this deck competitive, or how am I going to get this deck to move faster? It's not bad having a lot of power, but you have to be able to compromise sometimes. You might think that having the most powerful friend is essential, but it's not always the best option. And I've seen a lot of times, a lot of players will put a giant friend into play, or they'll build their deck around 3 and higher powered friends. That is fine, but you're going to lose efficiency against other decks that are built to have less cost, less power, but they're able to do more. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about tonight. So I have an interesting formula when I deck build. And my deck building strategy is very specific. And this is the formula. So entry is greater than the effect of the card, and the effect of the card is always going to be greater than the power of the card. So what does this mean? When you're considering building a deck, these are the things you're going to be looking at. You're going to pull out a card and you're going to say, okay, it's got 6 power. Well, look at its effect. If it's a 7 power friend with no effect, or it's a 6 power friend with a very weak effect, like this card can't contribute to face-offs, or it's a 4 power friend for 2 AT, and it says it can't contribute its power to face-offs, but it has a color rack, you're probably not going to run that. So when putting together your deck, entry is always first. Consider your entry. You don't want to overload on entry, but entry is generally going to be more important in your deck than its effect. If it has an effect, great. But remember your entry. Now, let's say that you have a card like Prim Hemline, which is 2 cost for 4 power. This card cannot contribute its power to confronting. It's entry and power. So in that scenario, things get a little bit more complicated. That's when you ignore the effect and you say, okay, it's my entry and it's got power. Well, the power is not going to help you, but it is an entry card. It helps you in the form of color requirement, which is why it would be actually required in a generosity deck versus in a deck like that's not using generosity. Prim Hemline is great for the entry part. Now, it's not going to be great for the effect, but it has 2 out of the 3 requirements here in my formula. And because it's entry over effect, that's why it would be greater. Now, if it's a card like Generous Pony, that's an entry. It's got a really good effect. I would include it. Now, that means that card, I would actually run that over Prim Hemline because of the fact that it's an entry card for 2 power, and it has the effect of +2 power to any character. All of a sudden, this is better than Prim Hemline, because Prim Hemline is your entry, has a bad effect, but it has lots of power, versus Generous Pony, which has your entry, but has a way better effect, but less power. So that's how this formula kind of works. This is a kind of formula that I generated that really looks at your choices and says, okay, you want entry over effect over power. So when looking at 2 cards, consider that power, consider that entry, and look at the effect that it offers. Now, let's look at what happens when you're considering power and all of a sudden you're looking at these 0 power cards. Well, 0 power cards, they're awful for flipping. When you are in a face-off and you flip a 0, you never want to do that because a 0 power flip is really bad. So why would you include them? Why would you consider a 0 power card like Princess Twilight Sparkle or Forest Owl? You don't want to flip this card. So you might say, okay, I don't want to include this in my deck. And all of a sudden you get into a game and you realize, oh, wait a minute. A 0 power, a Twilight Sparkle, and I'm running purple, and I was struggling throughout the game because I had no AT generation. I tried to use Factory Jack, but it wasn't working right. I needed some top decking. I needed something to generate more AT, and Factory Jack just wasn't doing it for me. But I don't want to include Princess Twilight Sparkle because it's 0 power. I would say, once again, entry, effect, power. So AJ is great. AJ Factory Jack is really good for stubborn and immediate exhaust for AT. But Princess Twilight Sparkle in a purple deck cover to cover is going to do more, because it's got Meticulous 1, prepared, and exhaust for AT. And it can be put into play by utilizing several methods turn 1. It is 0 power, but according to my formula, remember, entry, effect, power. So Princess Twilight Sparkle's effect is great, is phenomenal versus the power in a purple deck. In the terms of Forest Owl, it's a 1-drop that gives all your other characters here +1 power. This is phenomenal. Sure, it doesn't have any power because it's 0, but its effect more than makes up for it having 0 power. And with another Forest Owl in play, it's considered a 1 power. So, and it's an entry card. So it has a phenomenal effect. It's an entry card. It might have 0 power, but it has the 2 things that you want to consider before power. So that's kind of how you have to look at it when deciding these choices. And I think that a lot of times we get worked up in the whole, is this worth it? Is this the best decision? When you want to include cards into your deck and you're saying, okay, this card is going to do so much and this card is going to do so little, and you're wondering, well, what is it that my deck is missing? And a lot of times you want to look at the effects of your friends and everything in your deck, because sometimes you can include a great friend card, or at least think it's great, but it's not always the best friend that you could be using. And a lot of times having more power is not as beneficial as having 0. But 0 power friends do have their benefit. I wouldn't include them in every deck. I mean, it's weird to play a 0 power friend in your deck sometimes. Sometimes you don't want to run 0. Like if you're running a farming deck, running 0 power friends is actually less effective than running a high power friend. Sure, you might want to consider that Princess Twilight Sparkle in your purple farm deck, but in that example, you're doing so much on the flipping front, and generally you're confronting with your main, so now the formula is kind of reversed, and you want to consider power, effect, entry. But generally, even in those scenarios, if you're looking at putting in a lot of TMs, then you're going to look at your friends and you're going to say, okay, I need entry if I'm going to run at least one friend. Well, I have that in the form of, let's say, something Singing Barrel. So we remove entry from the formula because I'm only calculating the formula based around friends. The formula where entry is greater than power, which is entry greater than effect, which effect is greater than power. Look at the friend, look at your deck. If you're running Singing Barrel, well, you're probably going to have at least 3 power with your main in your color. So now you ignore entry. Then you consider effect, power. So what is that effect going to do? And make sure that the effect has an equivalency to its power. So an example I'll show you guys later. Well, 2 examples of effect, power, once we start ignoring entry, is actually Red Delicious and Rescue Party. Rescue Party is a 4 cost for 6 3 orange. 3 orange is your color, is basically just having a orange main flipped. So you pay 4 AT for 6. Now, this card can't be frightened. Flip an additional card during face-offs involving this card. This card might not look great on the surface, and you might be like, okay, really though, I don't want to pay 4 for 6. Yeah, that's a good deal. But what makes this card so much better is it has a great effect. So we don't need color entry. We ignore entry in this scenario. So between Red Delicious and Rescue Party, now this is a tough call. A lot of times we look at, between these two cards, you consider, do I want to run Rescue Party or do I want to run Red Delicious? Well, Red Delicious flips for an additional card. It's 4 orange rack for 4 AT. They cost the same amount of AT. The color rack isn't really going to matter if you're running these two usually, but for the sake of argument, if you have a 3 rack versus a 4 rack, a 3 rack is easier to accomplish than a 4. So when you look at this, you're going to look for effect before power. Well, based on my formula, and look at Rescue Party's effect. It has an effect, first off. Red Delicious does not have an effect. It's 6 power, meaning 90% of the time it can confront on its own in competitive play. So I would run it over Red Delicious, unless you somehow don't own a Rescue Party. Which, why wouldn't you? It's from the newest set. It's only a rare. Only a rare. Oh, newest set plus rare. Probably some people might not have it yet. Oh, the evil things I can accomplish. Wahaha. No, by the way, really, Pinky, you are blocking out Captain Solano. How could you? No, that is not right. Pinky, you should not be blocking out Captain Solano. Captain Solano has you beat. Ugh, card art. Urgh. Anger management issues. Well, Red Delicious is a power horse, and he literally is a power horse. He's one of 2 cards in the game with 7, and he's orange. I mean, come on. You would think that is great. But he doesn't have an ability, and that makes me cry. I'm over it. Okay, so Red Delicious is a card that flips for 7. It's a 7 power friend. But it's not going to be better than Rescue Party. In my opinion, it won't be better than Rescue Party because they have the same AT cost. Rescue Party is a color rack less and a power less, meaning it's got less power than Red Delicious. But Rescue Party has a phenomenal ability, and that's where Rescue Party has Red Delicious beat. Now, I talked a little bit about kind of 0 power cards and high powered cards. And I've been talking about them separate. And I had to get all that off my chest to make sure that we understood 0 power and high power. Now, a lot of people may say, well, Drada, 0 power? Why would you be so heavy about all this less power? Why do you want less power? What are you trying to get at here? Why are you trying to encourage less power? And I'm not. I'm really not. I'm not trying to advocate for one way or the other. It's just I've learned that with deck building, sometimes having the higher AT cost or the higher power isn't going to benefit you as greatly as the effect versus entry. And when you're deck building, consider that a fact, but remember that your entry is going to come first. Having plenty of entry is more important than having the best effect. If you're really trying to fine-tune your deck, I should note that I've been talking a lot about entry and it being greater than effect. When considering between two cards, entry is only greater until you have at least 9 pieces of entry, or 6, depending on your deck, but never less. I mean, you can go less. I just wouldn't recommend it because your efficiency starts dropping. Now, as far as entry goes, I do not consider trading traditions a number equal to your entry stuff. It cannot replace your entry. It really can't. It's nice to have it support your entry, but it should never replace entry. Just because you're going to start with trading traditions, that does not mean that trading traditions is more important than your entry cards. So you still have to have 6 pieces of entry. Now, when you're considering your entry, look at its effect, then look at its power. In some cases, Prim Hemline is better than Generous Pony. Sometimes you have to have that one card that is entry and has enough power to play your 4 power cards. And sometimes I do run Prim Hemline over Generous Pony. But as a general rule of thumb, you generally consider, what does that card have to offer? And it's a really simple formula. Definitely for people just starting out in the game and stuff, they might be saying card choice, card choice, card choice. Well, your card choices are going to be impacted by my formula. And I guarantee you that if you follow my formula, it will work. If you consider the entry, then effect, then power, you're probably going to come out with a better deck. Now, a lot of times, 0 power cards have an illusion to them. You're going to look at a 0 power card and you're going to immediately see that 0. And you're going to know that in the rules during face-offs, you have to flip. Sometimes you don't want us to flip a 0, but you built your deck in a way that doesn't make, or you're not using a 0 flip because you wanted to put a 0 power card into your deck, but it wasn't at all what you were expecting. And you looked at a 0 power card and you're like, but I don't want to include that because it's 0 power, but there's an illusion to some of them. And one of the illusions is what happens if a card actually has power, but its flip power is actually 0. Well, here's 2 examples of that. And when building your deck, sometimes the best cards have 0 power. But because they have 0 power, you might not consider them at first, but they might be the perfect card to include. And here's 2 examples. From Harmony, Spike Baby Dragon. I'm going to count it as an entry card for blue decks. 2 cost, 0 power. It would flip a 0. It totally would. But here's the kicker. Pay 1 to give this card +1 power until the end of the turn. Oh, it's not a 0 power while in play, though. It's only a 0 power when you flip it. So it gives the illusion when you're deck building that it actually has 0 power, but it actually possesses power as long as you can do an AT sync. So it can be any power equal to the amount of AT you possess. It also has Swift, so it moves for one less. And this is an effect that's pretty good. Spike Baby Dragon isn't so much of an impact nowadays in the current game as much as it used to be. And with that, and it's also only main phase that you can activate it, meaning that it's not an immediate, so you can't do it during the score phase, you can't do it there. But another example of a friend that has 0 power, and you might not think of it first, because you're like, oh, why would I want to play that? It's 0 power. And that's Changeling Citizens. Well, look at Changeling Citizens for a moment. It has Experienced. This card has +1 power for each card with the same name as this card in your discard. Changeling Citizens gets more power the more of them there are in your discard. So that means when you play one, it's technically 1 power if you have one in the discard. Here, the next ability is, as this card enters play, choose a color. This card is that color. Well, wait a minute. It's a colorless card. It costs 3. There's no color rack. It's entry! That means you consider it first if you don't have any other entry cards you want to run. You might consider this. Okay, well, it's color entry. When it comes into play, it's 0 power. And it only is +1 power when it's when it's got another one in the discard. But wait, there's another ability. Wah ha 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 ha. Yes, there is another ability. This card has +1 power for each of your other characters. What? It does? Oh, now that's infinitely better. I realize I made that really dramatic. I like being dramatic. Dramatic is fun. Changeling Citizens is your entry card. It's got a phenomenal effect, and it can have stupid amounts of power, or amount of power. I mean, I've seen Changeling Citizens get up to 6, 7 power on its own, providing sheer color wreck. I've also had them frightened on me before, and I cried. I've also had them, it's gonna work. But I didn't want it to work, though. It can't work like that. I cry every time I see Changeling Citizens go. By the way, did anyone else notice that there's like a baby thorax? Like, anyone else notice that there's like a thorax next, like, literally on the left side of the card, second to the rear? That changeling looks exactly like thorax. I swear, it's like a baby thorax. What in the world? Okay. By the way, everyone's a changeling, just so you know. It's official. I declare the entire world filled of changelings. Patented and accepted by Drata Arcana, the alicorn that's actually a changeling. It's official. Seriously, What? I'm not a changeling. Are you sure? Anyways, back on track. Changeling Citizens is one of those cards that I do run in some of my decks. And the reason why I run them is because I'm usually trying to color fix for multiple cards. Sometimes I just use Singing Barrel if I have 3 colors, but the moment I start getting in the 4 or 5 color range, I start looking at Changeling Citizens. And the reason for that is, as I play more friends, my Changeling Citizens will get stronger and stronger. So, it's one of those cards that has 0 power. That's just an illusion. It's in your mind that it has 0 power. It actually has whatever power plus the number of friends you have. Or its power is equal to the number of friends and characters you have. That includes your main character. Now here's the real kicker. If you have another Changeling Citizens in play, it actually counts the other one too. So basically, you're not losing one power in that case. You're actually staying even with two of them in play. And that's kind of how you use it. You use it to color fix, and then it becomes stupid amounts of power over time. Now, I've talked a lot about entry, effect, and power, but let's get into something a little bit more interesting. What happens when the AT amount, the effect, and the power, and the entry is just not all in one place? An example of this: Pinkie Pie One Philly Party. I have nothing good to say about this card. I mean, it's interesting. It's a pink yellow card. I mean, I guess it's interesting because it's UR, but let me explain my process on this. Pinkie Pie One Philly Party is a 3-cost AT. It costs 3 AT for 4 power. That's not bad. You get 4 power at the cost of 3. But it's got 3 pink rec, 3 yellow rec. And its ability, one of your friends here with 1 printed power. If one of your friends here with 1 printed power would be sent home, send it to another problem instead. Okay, that's an okay effect. Is it worth the 3 AT to get it out? And having the 3 pink and 3 yellow? Which means I have to color fix for it, so it's effectively a minimum of 4 AT. It's essentially 4 for 4. Unless you have to color fix with a 2 power friend that only gives 2 power. In that case, it becomes more. It's essentially 4 for 4 with an ability that if a friend would be sent home, it goes to another problem. I mean, yes, it getting sent home by the game is considered sending. But in the long term, there are much more effective cards than this that do the same thing. The only times that this would be useful is if a troublemaker sent your friend home. But it can't go back to that problem. It's got to go to the other problem. It can't go back to the same problem. So it's not a great effect. For the AT that you are spending, which is, I'm calculating it at 4, not 3, but 4. Yes, it's got 4 power. But the effect is not worth it. So the AT effect and power and entry do not add up enough to make this card worth it, in my opinion. I mean, I'm sure people will run it. I'm sure it has its uses in a pink-yellow deck. I'm sure people might run it. I'm not going to discount a card because it has a bad ability. I'm just saying that the cost, the power to effect ratio with entry is not equivalent. It's not. You're spending too much and getting too little out of it in a competitive standpoint. But I'm not going to stop you from running this card. You should totally run it. You should run every card in the game at least multiple times. So you experience different cards, different effects and stuff. I'm just saying that if you're building a competitive deck, you might not consider this card because of the cost, the power to effect to entry ratio. And that's where deciding which card to use can be challenging. You have to make sure that the effect is worth the cost to put it into play. If the effect is more valuable than your power, then you're going to go with the effect, especially if it only has a one color rec. Or even if it has a two color rec in your two colors that you can easily color fix into. But generally, when I run cards that need to be color fixed into, I make sure their AT cost is much lower. Because generally a high cost AT card, I'd rather have a monocolor in that. Something that costs 4 AT, but has, 4 power, but has a 4 or a 3 color rec for 2 different colors, I might not run that unless the effect is actually worth the energy to consider. And that's things that you have to consider while deck building. And I do suggest looking at this kind of stuff. So one of the other things that you might want to consider is, give me a sec. Okay, so here's an interesting diagram. Let's say you were building purple-orange, right? You wanted to build a purple-orange deck, and you're like, oh, I need Twilight Sparkle, but I also want Red Delicious in there. I need Twilight Sparkle and I need Red Delicious. But I can only include one. This is an argument that comes up a lot when you're deck building. And it is not an easy conflict. I mean, seriously. Throw away all the cards. This is too tough of a decision, or I'm going to freak out. Remember to relax, be calm, be still. Grab a nice book, read, and you will feel better. Anyways, enough of that. When considering deciding between Red Delicious and Princess Twilight Sparkle, or cover to cover, or considering a high-powered friend versus zero power, you can only choose one. Let's say you can only choose one of these. You might not have to, or whatever. And even if we replace Red Delicious with Rescue Party, but you can only choose between a cover to cover and Rescue Party. How do you decide between these two? When is having more power beneficial versus having no power? Well, as my diagram from earlier shows, and I'll go back to it real quick. Hold on, give me one moment. The power formula. Let's show this again. Entry is greater than effect is greater than power. And you have to decide when you're deciding deck choices. Effect is always greater than power, but sometimes two cards have a great effect, and you can only choose between the two. So even though Red Delicious is there, let's pretend it's a Rescue Party. Cover to Cover has a great ability. One of the best zero power cards in the game. Single-handedly. Versus Rescue Party. So when is running Cover to Cover going to be greater than Rescue Party? Well, Cover to Cover generates AT, and AT acceleration is very powerful. It also gives you Meticulous 1. But Rescue Party can't be frightened, and it flips an additional card. It's also only 3 orange rack. Now, if you're running a purple main, Cover to Cover is going to be more effective than a Rescue Party. But if you have an orange main, I would say Rescue Party over Cover to Cover. And according to this example, Red Delicious over Cover to Cover maybe in an orange deck. Now, you might be saying, but Dorada, That's ignoring your formula. Yes, it's ignoring my formula. But remember, these aren't the only 2 cards in your deck. I hope not. Otherwise, you're just playing an entire deck of 0 flips and you're getting nowhere and you can't confront a problem. Not the least of which you can't include 45 cover-to-covers or 45 Red Deliciouses. But always remember, stick times 30. You must have 30 sticks. Staff and Cicadas times 30. Golden rule of gaming is magic. Stick times 30. We have 30 sticks. We have all the sticks. All of them. Anyways. Yeah. Anyways. I will continue to fight for stick times 30. I want a card that literally says, you may have 30 sticks in your deck when this card is in play. That would just be a weird ability. Whatever. Princess Twilight Sparkle, cover to cover, is going to be better in a purple main color deck. Versus, technically, if we're going to go technical, it's called Magic. Who uses that term anyways? And Red Delicious is technically Honesty. So you guys might be saying, well, Drada, you're only using orange and purple cards. And the reason for this is that instead of searching for every single high power card in the game, the easiest ones to find are purple and orange for power because they're common, people know them, they're obvious, people know what they are. I was going for easy to recognize cards. Cards that everyone usually should have. So anyways, back to the topic. Princess Twilight Sparkle, cover to cover, is going to be better, well, not to repeat myself, but I'll say it one more time. Cover to cover is going to be better than Rescue Party or Red Delicious in a purple deck with orange off. While having an orange main versus a purple main, if you don't use, you want to consider if the 0 power card has a great effect, it will most of the time be better based on your entry color. It's another thing to consider. And once again, that is entry over effect over power, going back to my formula. Literally, I don't think you could get a more precise formula when building your decks. So in a decision like this, if the entry color is purple, you look at the effect of the purple card when comparing 2 cards. Then you consider its power. So if the effect and the entry are equivalent, then it is most definitely greater than the power. But if the entry and power are higher than the effect, it's worth considering. As long as the cost of the card is not significant enough to impact playing that card. And that's generally how you have to think of deck building. And I think that that is by far the toughest decision. So when considering all of this, make sure that you are focused on what that ability does, what that effect does. Because I've seen it a lot. I've talked to players and stuff, and they're like, Drada, I don't want to include a 0 power card. I don't want to play a 0 power. I don't want to play a card with 1 power. And they do that. They build their decks with excessive amounts of power with high AT drop. And then they're wondering why their deck is getting destroyed in a game or why they're losing all the time. And the answer is did you consider what abilities you were putting into the deck? Did you consult their effects? Did you look at their AT cost? Did you look at their effects? Or did you only look at the power? And that's what defines your decision. You can't do that. Your deck is going to hurt. It's going to be like, it's going to be this, on the outside, but in all the games it's gonna be this, and it's basically all for show. And then you're gonna be like this, and you're gonna be screaming your head off why I keep losing. I'm so agitated that I'm losing. I'm the worst possible deck builder ever. Just relax and look at this formula and say to yourself, Drata's really smart. I should deck build with that in mind. Because that's actually not a bad formula. And it isn't. And even though I haven't been in this game as long as some other players, I am very intellectual when it comes to deciding which are the best cards for my deck. And when consulting it by following this formula myself, I've generally built some pretty decent decks out there. And that is the real challenge of deck building, is trying to stick with stick. I will stick with sticks. I like Staphys Sacanis. I want all the Staphys Sacanis. I have them all. I own them all. No, I don't. I just own 5, but whatever. Yes. Consider the effect before power. Consider the entry requirement, the entry that it will provide before you consider the effect. That means check your color racks first. Check if the card has a color rack, look at the color rack. Then look at, if it is an entry card, look at it as an entry card. Next, look to see what effect it has. Look to see and then go back to the color rack. And does playing this card at this color rack at this AT cost, what kind of impact with this effect, what kind of impact will this card have on the game? Then consider power. So you have to look at these 3 things when deck building. For any card in the game, you have to look at its entry, how it's going to enter play, what's it going to, how to get it into play. That's basically what your entry is. How to get it into play. It's entry into play by just paying AT. Then you look at the effect of when it is in play, or when it enters play. Then you look at the power and the long-term power of how it will impact. Don't ever consider it a card when it's in the deck. When it's in the draw deck, do not build in the anticipation that you will flip it. Because I guarantee you that if you think that way, you could be missing out on a card that would provide you more benefit than if you hadn't included it. Words of wisdom, people. Consider every card, even if it's 0 power. We don't like 0 power. But as I said, it could be an illusionary 0 power. It only is 0 when you flip it. Only. What are the odds that you're going to flip a 3 card, 1 of 3, or even 1 of 2? It is not likely. I have found that when playing my decks, I tend to flip 0s at the worst possible moment. Yes. But the odds of me doing it are really slim in a lot of my decks. So I do look at them. Basically, the way you have to look at it is, if I flip a 0, I was going to lose that face-off regardless. And you just move on. Because sometimes that card is going to provide a better in-play ability than the flip. And if you get so worked up about your flips, then you shouldn't be running that deck. If you're trying to build a deck around flipping for face-offs to defeat TMs or to always win the face-off, then you have to find a way to make that 0 not hurt as much. And that's going to be things like power counters, having experienced Staphys Sacanis. You know, you have to supplement for it. And that's why sometimes not putting in a 0 or 1 power friend is actually more of a detriment if you replace it with a 3 power friend. I would look at the 0 powers. If you're not wanting to include them, include some of them. Specifically the ones mentioned in this stream. They are probably the strongest 0 powered friends right now in the game. Forest Owl is from Premier. The Changeling Citizens is from Defenders of Equestria. And the Cover to Cover is a structure deck from High Magic, which is actually out of stock at the moment. Yay. Anyways, I think that's it for tonight's stream. I pretty much covered, I beat it over the bush, did a lot of repeating of myself like I always do. But, once again, this stream will be uploaded to YouTube. And let me go over this real quick. A lot of people have been asking, like, okay, where do I go for YouTube? Where do I go for Twitch? Go to gaminghighmagic.twitch.tv or twitch.tv.com for this. Go to Gaming HIgh, which is actually supposed to be Gaming is Magic, but that already existed. Then look for Drata Arcana on YouTube. It'll be up there. It'll be uploaded. And I think that I failed to get the name changed of the stream tonight. Sorry about that, folks. I'm sure that there was a lot of confusion. But thank you all for joining me tonight. And next up at 10 o'clock EST or 7 o'clock, I think, PST or PCT, don't know the actual lettering on that. Commentary is Magic is having a stream about yellow aggro, which is kind of similar to which I'm actually kind of excited to see how they talk about aggro. So once again, everyone that joined me tonight, thank you for being here. And once again, you'll be able to find me on YouTube at Drata Arcana. You have to actually look for Drata Arcana because I don't actually have a YouTube designed for this channel. It's my own channel. But I'm going to continue to stream to Gaming HIgh Magic. I will continue to update you guys on what's going on here in Indianapolis because we are having some issues with the full group. But for right now, I am going to continue to stream every week at this time on Sunday, 8 p.m. EST. And once again, thank you for your support. And we will definitely see you guys next time. Once again, this is Gaming is Magic, and I am Drata Arcana. And see you guys next time. So long. Peace.